Hello and welcome to Norm's Real Estate Tips. Today we continue the series on posts for sellers. I'm coming to you again today from my home in Milford, Michigan, where I work as a full-time real estate agent for Real Estate One. Today's topic will be the forms that you'll be needing to fill out to list your home before you get even to the listing agreement. Remember when we were doing the buyer side, if you watch those, that the buyer was required to actually read through and sign the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint disclosure before the buyer was allowed to actually make an offer or sign an offer. So today we're going to see the other side, and you as a seller are required to fill out the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint disclosure as part of the paperwork that you've got to fill out to list your home. So let's go through it. At the top part, you'll see that there's a section on appliances, systems, and services. Basically, these are things that the seller that will be in the house, well, you'll actually be able to indicate whether they're in the house or not. And if they're in the house, they're asking the seller to indicate whether they work or not to the best of that seller's knowledge. Again, remember, because the seller lives here, he's expected to know the answer to these things. So they ask about the range and the dishwasher and the refrigerator, common appliances that are in there. Do they work or not? Yes or no? If you don't know, you can check unknown. You just put check marks in these as a seller. And if there isn't one of these things, or it won't be in the home when the buyer gets there, just check off not available. So then they go into things like the hood fan, the disposal, TV antenna, and rotor. That's kind of a vestige of a bygone era, and almost everybody either puts no or unknown, although there are very few TV rotors and antennas available anymore on houses. But if you get out into the countryside, it could be out there. Then they're asking the electrical systems. So a lot of sellers will say, what does that mean? Well, generally it means when you flip a light switch, does the light come on or does smoke come out of the wall? In other words, does the electrical system work as it should? And if you have circuits in your house that don't work, you'll need to indicate that elsewhere on this form. Does the garage door opener and remote work or not? Sometimes you don't have a garage door opener and you could mark that not available. Some of these things are pretty much always not available, or many times. Alarm systems and intercoms, central vacs. Many houses don't have those, so those are just marked not available. Attic fans or something a lot of houses in the north have, but maybe not in other places in the country. Pool heaters, if you don't have a pool, obviously you don't have a pool heater or anything like that, so those could be not available. So you go down through this list, and you'll see at the bottom it says explanations. Explains things if you have either an ambiguous answer or if you said no. Like you said, no, the electrical system doesn't work. You better explain that. That's going to be a big red flag for people. Some of these, you're doing the best you can in terms of whether you know or not. When it says septic tank and drain field, I mean, obviously, if you flush the toilet and the water goes down and doesn't come bubbling up in the yard, it appears to work, so you should say yes. If you've had it pumped out or something, there's a place later in the form for that to indicate that. So answer all of these questions to the best of your ability. Fireplace and chimney is another one of those. You say, what does that mean? Well, when you light a fire, does the smoke go up the chimney and out, or does it fill the room with smoke? So these are some of the things that you should be able to indicate. Right below that are a number of questions that are started on this page and continued on the next page that ask questions about the systems in the house itself, the property. The basement crawl space, has there been evidence of water? When you get a heavy rain, does it flood the basement? If it does, you better put that in there and then explain later on why or what you're doing about it. Or if it did once, remember it says if there's water, has there been evidence of water in the basement? So maybe it flooded 3 years ago, but then you got the gutters fixed and the land regraded. And you need to indicate that so that they understand there was a problem, but it doesn't recur now. Insulation is an interesting one. A lot of people don't know what kind of insulation they have in their house. Most newer houses have fiberglass. Some of the older houses, if you go way back, unfortunately had insulation made with asbestos, and that's not a good thing. And then there was a particular kind of foam insulation at a time that had formaldehyde in it, and that's not a good thing. So if you know those things, you've got to disclose it. Otherwise, it's probably fiberglass. Some people do put unknown down there because they've never gone up and looked to see what was up there. If the roof leaks, there's a question about that. You've got to answer that one way or another. And the type of well and the depth. A lot of people, if they've got wells, don't know the well depth. The type means, is it a 4-inch well, a 5-inch well, 6-inch well? How what's the diameter of the pipe leading down in the well? And the depth you can actually find out at the county if you need to. All wells are on a county well log, at least in Michigan. So you can look that up at the health department and they'll tell you how deep it is. On the second page, you've got things like the condition of the drain field and the septic. Whether or not you have, what kind of heating system you have. That's basically whether you've got forced air, baseboard, steam, whatever that is, what the age of it is, what type of plumbing is in the house. In the old days, they put galvanized plumbing in, and they switched over to copper, and now they're actually using a plastic kind of plumbing called PEC, I think it is, that you might indicate on here. The main thing people don't want to see is that there's still galvanized plumbing in the house, because there are lead issues with that type of plumbing. Electrical system again means does the system work as it's supposed to? And if you've got any problems, this would be the place to indicate it. Whether you have any kind of infestation or have ever had an infestation is a question on this second set of questions. And that basically asks about things like termites, carpenter ants. In this area, powder post beetles can be a problem. So if you had a infestation problem, it could include things like, rats, mice, even raccoons. I've had some houses that I've shown that had raccoons in them, and they can cause quite a problem. So, you need to indicate, okay, we had it, we fixed it, we're getting it continually sprayed, whatever, so that the buyer knows it's not going to be an ongoing problem. And then environmental problems that you may be aware of. Most people have never had their houses tested for a lot of the environmental problems, like radon gas. Many people don't know they've got asbestos-wrapped pipes in their old houses, and they may say unknown, but when the inspector gets through inspecting it, they'll probably know they've got a problem that they've got to deal with. So then they're asking if you, some other questions that, again, the owner should know, whether you have any shared or common things with an adjoining property, like a shared driveway. If it's a condo, do you have a shared wall? Do you share a fence with a neighbor? Things like that. Things that you may have some responsibility or shared responsibility to maintain. And again, if you know, you've got to indicate that. If you know of any encroachments, you need to indicate that. Maybe your neighbor built something that encroaches on your land, or you built something that encroaches on his. You need to indicate that. Here's one that's kind of tricky, because a lot of people don't think of what they did as being wrong in this case. But it asks about modifications to the structure, and that really can include things like finishing your basement without pulling permits. So what this is saying is, if you made any modifications to the house, added a room, knocked out a wall, changed a room, finished your basement, things that required you to modify the structure or the systems, such as the electrical and plumbing systems, did you pull the necessary permits and get the work inspected? If you did it yourself, didn't pull permits, you may have a problem. Then there are things such as any flooding problems or damage in a lot of local area homes here, especially down in the city or in that area. We've had cases of basement floodings when sewers backed up. You've got to indicate that if that happens, in your case. And also if there's any structural or grading problems caused by flooding. Sometimes flooding is caused by grading problems. The water flows back towards the house instead of away from it. It's asking if there's any farm or was any farm operations in the vicinity, or if it's in the vicinity of a landfill, an airport, or a shooting range. Now, what vicinity means is kind of an interesting thing. I've seen it indicated that if you're within 5 miles of an airport, you should say yes, because that's within the zone of danger of planes, crashing, taking off, or coming in for landings. But if you live close to an airport or a landfill or a gun range, you know it and you need to disclose it on this form. Are there any outstanding assessments, utilities or fees or gas assessments or anything like that you haven't paid or that are being paid off over a period of time? You need to disclose those. And in fact, either that will have to be paid off, or there needs to be a contractual arrangement to allow the buyer to assume that responsibility. Any outstanding municipal fees or assessments. Sometimes there are fees that municipalities put on places to cover things like road improvements, etc. They're normally paid off over many years, and if you're 5 years into a 20-year payoff, you need to indicate that on this form, and then again either pay it off or make sure that it's covered under some form of contractual transfer of that obligation. So if any of those questions are answered yes, you need to do some explaining. There's a couple lines there, and then it says if you need more than that, attach some extra sheets. So this is the seller's disclosure. It's a very important document. As I said, there is no specific set of penalties or fines if you don't fill it out properly, but it forms the basis for really good lawsuits later on for fraud if the buyer feels like you defrauded them by not filling these things out properly or honestly. The judge is not going to look very kindly on a homeowner who has lived in a home for 8, 10, 20 years and fails to disclose that every time it rains the basement floods. They're going to look at it as something you should have known, and if you should have known it, then you should have disclosed it, and you'll probably lose that particular case. The next form is the lead-based paint form, and this is a federally required form. It's one required under federal laws. There is a penalty up to $10,000 for not providing this disclosure to the buyer, or not providing it properly, or being honest about it. So that's quite a hefty penalty. You don't want to mess around with this when it's a federal type thing. On the top part of that form, it's going to ask you if the house was built before 1978. And if you say yes, then you have to answer all these other questions. If you say no, it was not built, or it's asking you if it was built after. So if you say yes, it was built after, you don't have to answer the rest of the questions. But if you say no, it was not built after 1978, then you got to answer those other 3 questions up on the top there. So that's the lead-based paint disclosure. If you get through these 2 documents, then we'll be ready, next time we'll cover this, to go into the actual listing agreement, which is the exclusive right to sell your property. Hopefully you've learned something from this little episode. You now know that it's important that you honestly and completely answer the seller's disclosure and the lead-based paint disclosure before you get into listing your house. I'm Norm Warner, and these are Norm's Real Estate Tips. Next time we'll discuss the actual listing agreement. Thank you very much for watching.